Hello, viewers. Welcome back to the Moose Mobile Auto Repair channel. And today I'm working on a 2015 Toyota Sienna with the 3.5 liter V6 2GR FE engine. And we are just going to be replacing the lower control arms on this vehicle because the control arm bushing is completely separated. So we are going to be replacing them today. So this vehicle has approximately 334,000 kilometers on it. And earlier, I think roughly 140,000 kilometers ago, I've already replaced the control arms with aftermarket ones. I am using the Moog control arms because the OEM control arms are extremely expensive. So I am just using an aftermarket option because the customer wanted something a little bit cheaper because it's outside their budget. So I'm using aftermarket parts instead. They work just as well, although the original Toyota parts are a little bit better than the aftermarket ones. So if you look over here on the passenger side, you can see the control arm bushing is pretty much completely separated and coming out. On the driver's side is not so much, but earlier it was separating, but I think it went slightly back in during driving, but I'm going to be replacing them anyways. So we are going to be starting off on the driver's side first. You can see the control arm bushing here is not as separated on this side, but we are replacing both control arms. And I'm also going to be replacing the engine and transmission mounts on each side. So at this moment, I'm going to be supporting the transmission by putting a block of wood and a jack on the transmission pane so I can get this out because there's a bolt that's in the way over here is blocking. This is blocking the bolt. So we are going to get the mount off first and deal with that. So we're going to support the transmission by using a block of wood and a jack and just support it on the transmission pan. You have to make sure it's properly centered, otherwise it's going to slip. So I've supported the transmission with a block of wood and a jack just to hold it there, and we're going to start removing the top nut and the bottom bolts nuts. So you can grab a wrench and loosen up the nut. You can see that the nut and the stud is spinning at the same time. So it's not exactly cooperating. So I probably have to hold it in place somehow in order to get it out. This is the issue I ran into the other time. So the stud is turning at the same time. I can just take this all the way out, but I'll have to reuse the nut for the new mount. This one, it spins at the same time, so you may have to use like a vice grip or something, but being careful to not damage the threads if you are saving this. So there are three 17 bolts, one over here, one hiding behind here, and there's one here. So we are going to loosen these by hand first because we don't want to. We want to make sure that the studs don't get screwed up, because then it's going to spin at the same time, and then you'll have even more problems. So we're gonna do it by hand first, because sometimes if you use an impact, that could damage things. So we're just going to loosen up the nuts. And one over here in the back. I'm going to loosen and remove all of the nuts. So now I'm just going to jack up the transmission a bit so I'm able to get the mount out of the way. Should be able to get it out easily. And there goes the mount. We're just going to be replacing this. Just after this job is done, you just want to make sure that when you install a new mount, or if you reuse the old one, to line up the dimple here. There's a piece on the aluminum housing. There's a hole here, so you want to make sure that you line it up. You line it up before you set the transmission down. So now we expose the 22 millimeter bolt. That's what the main issue is of this job, because the mount is in the way. So we're just gonna start loosening and removing all of the bolts now. 22 millimeter shallow socket, half drive, and a breaker bar to loosen the bolt. So that's loosened, and we're gonna do the other side. The other side is down here, a bit harder to access. So this one is a bit harder to access because the stabilizer bar is in the way. So you may need an extension or something. So you can use like a deep socket or a small extension just to give you some access room or space. You may have to change the positioning. Just use a couple long extensions so that you have some leverage. Now I'm just switching to a smaller ratchet. This is the setup that I have. Just a couple extensions in a shallow socket. Get the bolt out now. Another bolt. not using impact tools because getting access is a bit difficult, but you can use impact tools if you want to get it out. And that's that. Now we need to take out the bolt and the nut. So you use a wrench to hold the nut. Let's see what size this is. This is a 19. Yeah, a 19. This is gonna be a 19, top and bottom. Hold the wrench. Now the lower ball joint, two 17 nuts and one 17 bolt. So loosen up and remove the nuts. You could loosen this before or after, doesn't matter, but the control arm will just swing a little bit as you're doing it. So it doesn't matter which way you do first when you're removing the control arm. Now you can push down on the control arm and you should be able to get it out. After that, you can double check the ball joint, see if it needs replacement or not. Otherwise, I suggest you leave it alone if there's no play. The new control arm came with a new ball joint, but I don't want to use it because aftermarket some aftermarket ball joints are not that great. So I just leave the Toyota ball joints on because they last for an extremely long time. So now you should be able to get the control arm out just by like wiggling it and taking it out, and it just comes out like that. You can see there's a large crack in the bushing. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera. Also, don't forget that there are brackets. There's a bracket piece that comes out. You're going to have to reuse this. Make sure you don't lose that bracket. It's very important. So compare the old and the new control arms. Transfer over this piece over to the new control arm. This is very important. Do not forget this bracket. And then I'm just going to unbolt the ball joint because I'm not going to be using that. So what I like to do, I like to put some grease inside the sleeve of the bushing so that in the future, hopefully it does not seize up. And I also like to put some grease on the bolts. You can clean the bolts, put some grease or anti-seize or whatever you want to put. That will help to prevent the threads and metal from galling up and damage. So I always like to put some form of grease or anti-seize on the bolts so that in the future you don't have issues in removing the bolts if for any reason you want to replace these control arms again. So we're going to spray a little bit of the fluid film rust proofing stuff in the area just for rust proof and to make things a little easier sometimes to slide in the control arm. So I already removed the lower ball joint from the control arm because I'm not going to be using it. So we're gonna install this part first. This is the one you need to install first before doing anything else. Sometimes it may be a little bit tricky to get in, so you need to play with it a bit. So we're gonna try to line this up. And there's no problems with reusing the bolts. If you want to reuse the bolts, unless they are too badly damaged. I'm trying to line up the bushing sleeve so the bolt can go through. Once you have the bolt through, immediately install the nut. But don't tighten anything down yet. So you're going to swing this over, line this up. Install the two bolts. Make sure it's lined up in the bracket, in the hole properly. Probably best to do this by hand first. We're going to install the other bolt. And I will put the torque specs on the screen for you guys to see when it comes down to tightening these bolts up. So once you hand tighten the bolts, a few threads or so, you can start to tighten down the bolts now. There's one thing that you want to make sure is that you want to make sure that the control arm is still loose and hanging so that the bushing and the sleeve and everything can line up into the hole. Otherwise, you won't be able to tighten up these bolts. So you gotta make sure that the ball joint is not partially connected or fully connected to the control arm yet, because this area has to flex and move so you're able to tighten down the bolts. Otherwise, the threads will not go in all the way. So I had some difficulty trying to get these two bolts in, but now they're going in. One thing I wanted to mention is that you want to make sure that there's no dirt or anything on the threads, otherwise it won't go in. And you may need to have to push down and up on the control arm so the bolts can line up properly, because they have to go on a specific angle. And also the captive a fixed nut that's in the subframe, you can feel the bolt going through afterwards. So that's how you know it's starting to go through. So you need to pay attention to that. And sometimes the stabilizer bar and the link will be in the way of the control arm because it's hitting the stabilizer link and the stabilizer bar. In some rare cases, you may need to disconnect it just to get it out of the way, because this control arm has to be able to go and sit upwards and not be in the way of this. So you need to take a note of all of that when you're installing these two bolts. So I just got the bolts in now. I had some trouble earlier. Well, what I did is I placed a pry bar underneath here to help me to get the bolts in by hand. So as I'm placing the pry bar underneath the cylindrical type bushing, uh, I placed the pry bar underneath, and then I try to tighten it by hand to get it through the threads all the way. Just just take note to be patient with getting in the bolts, because these bolts can be relatively tricky. So right now you don't want to tighten all of the bolts yet, because I still need to install the lower ball joint first, and we are going to support the suspension before we tighten down the nuts and bolts, so that the typically you're supposed to tighten do a final tightening when you're on the drive on rack or something, or drive on ramps, and tighten it then, so that all of the load on the suspension is unloaded. Because if it's loaded while you're tightening up the bushings, then it's possible that the bushing can fail prematurely. It's not it's ideal that you do that, but I don't really see too many guys do that. So it's best if you do. I've seen some information on service information where you can support the lower ball joint or something to relieve the suspension, and then tighten down the bolts then. So what you want to do now is to push down on the lower control arm and line up the lower ball joint. Sometimes that the axle will be pushed out, so you may need to push into the knuckle to get the axle lined up, because the ball joint is not going to ever line up in this case. So here, just I pushed the knuckle in, and you can see the inboard joint, it went back in. This is the plunge joint, so it moves sometimes when you're doing a suspension work. So now you just need to line up the lower ball joint, get it inside the holes. So we're just gonna put some grease on the bolt and the nuts. We'll put the torque specs for everything on the screen for you guys to see if you want to torque the suspension bolts. So you're going to lightly to tighten these nuts and bolts. So we are going to torque the lower ball joint to 68 foot-pounds. And then now we are going to support the the uh, the ball joint and start tightening up the bolts. I'm just using a bottle jack, or you can use a jack or something, anything to support the suspension. This will help to unload the suspension when you are tightening up the bolts and the nuts. We're just going to tighten down the bolt and the nut on this side. It's a 19. And then we're going to torque it now. Torque spec is 103 foot-pounds. So while the suspension is fully supported, we're going to torque to 103. That's 103. Now the two forward bolts, 148. And the same for the other side, also 148. And so everything is all torqued. So we are going to remove the bottle jack from the suspension and lower it down. So now we are going to proceed to install the new uh, transmission mount. We just need to line it up inside the opening, get everything in, and you may need to jack up the transmission a tiny bit, unless you can get this in first, but that may not work. We're gonna do that. We're gonna jack up the transmission a bit to have some room for the stud. Is there room yet? There's not enough room yet. Let's see if we can use a pry bar just to get some room. There we go. Use a pry bar to push down on the pan so you can line this guy up. And should be able to be okay after that. I'm just going to slowly release the jack. There's a dimple here that needs to line up with this, so we're just going to slowly release the jack and line it up. seated in, hopefully. I think that should be okay. Seems to be lined up. Now on the old stud from the old mount, I'm just gonna have to use something like a vice grip and to get the nut out. So I got the nut out, just lubricated it with some grease. See if it threads in okay. And just need to tighten it up after that, and then we'll do the three bottom uh, nuts. This one, you don't need to tighten it down all that tight, just until it's snug and you're good. I will put the torque specs if you guys want to torque the nut. So I remove the jack completely out of the way. You don't want to over tighten it because this is aluminum. So now we're just gonna reinstall the three nuts. You want to take a deep socket and to line up the nuts into the studs. That will be easier. And you don't want to drop it in the subframe because then you might lose it. Do the same for the other one. I believe these nuts I think are 73 foot-pound, but I will put the torque specs on the screen for you guys to see if you want to torque it. You can just tighten these snug and you're good. So I'm just going to tighten these up. And that should be good. I did put some grease on the studs so that way they don't rust and so the threads don't get damaged. And don't forget to install the rubber grommet cover after you're finished. If you want to make sure that the nuts are tight, you can just use a ratchet. Just verify that they are snug. You should be all good to go. And once you're done, you can reinstall the rubber grommet, plastic grommet. This one is kind of broken already. It's not intact, but I'll try my best to keep it in there. This one's like partially deteriorated, broken. And there we go. Just gotta make sure you keep this piece on the outside. And that's it. So that's it. The control arms installed, a new transmission mount. Everything is tight, and that's going to be it. Just verify everything is. Just verify and double check your work. Make sure everything is okay. Clean up the brake rotor. The customer did have a complaint for a pulsation, but I might not have time to look at it today because there's a whole bunch of other work that I need to do. So I'm not going to be showing the passenger side because it's the exact same thing. It's very similar in procedure, and especially the mount is also the same. So is just going to be the same on repeat. So that's all you need to know for this repair. After you're done with the control arms, it's probably best to take the vehicle to an alignment shop to get the vehicle aligned afterwards. So for the passenger side, there's a mount that's like this. It's very similar, pretty much almost the same. This is the old mount from the driver's side. This is the insulator. On the passenger side is going to be the exact same procedure. You just need to support the engine with a jack and a block of wood, and the mount is pretty much exactly the same. A nut here and 3 nuts at the bottom, and that's it. For the passenger side, which is pretty much almost all done, if you want to torque it with a torque wrench and the suspension unloaded, I just use a deep socket, half drive, 22 millimeters. Just put it underneath the axle and you should be able to have room to torque it. So this is the old and rusty control arm. So that's it for this one. That's going to conclude this video for today. That's the replacement of the lower control arms. The passenger side is going to be relatively and exactly the same thing as the driver's side. Is just a mirror. So it's the exact same thing, just opposite, and that's it. So after you're done, make sure you get the vehicle aligned. Send it to the alignment shop because the steering wheel will be slightly off in most cases. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and please don't forget to hit that bell notification if you haven't done so. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.